Hello and welcome you crazy people, my name is Jay and in this video I'm going to try and ask the question, will competitive gaming hurt Star Wars Legion? Now there's a bit of a backstory to this to even set up the premise of why it might do, and it all stems from Steam Forged games, or gaming, I'm not 100% sure what they're called. They basically closed down Guild Ball, the war game, because they, well, in a large part they seem to blame the competitive gaming side of things. And to some extent, they seem to have blamed the competitive players, which definitely rubs some of the players up the wrong way. There was a video I watched where somebody was particularly unhappy about it. So they did that. They said that basically the game had become so competitive that it had become unfun for the vast majority of players. And the question here, could this happen to Legion? Well, spoiler alert, I think the answer is no. But we'll get on to why in a moment. Then following that, there was videos from Blackjack Legacy and Glass Half Dead, who basically articulated a lot of my thoughts on that specific Guild Ball thing. And then Glass Half Dead was more talking about how Warhammer doesn't really, 40k and stuff like that, doesn't really have to even worry about competitive because the vast majority of the audience isn't competitive. So could the competitive element of Star Wars Legion hinder Star Wars Legion? Number one, I think we probably we don't necessarily know the exact size of, say, hobbyists and casual players versus the competitive players. There's probably more people playing competitive 40k than there is competitive Star Wars Legion. I would just suggest that competitive Star Wars Legion is probably seen to be a more balanced competitive game. I don't think most people would disagree with that, or they would at least say that Games Workshop games, especially 40k and Age of Sigmar, perhaps not the most balanced of games, right? I also think that, even though we don't necessarily know the numbers, I think competitive gamers get a bad reputation for it's not for no real reason, but they get a bad reputation, which is probably unfair to the vast majority of them. Yes, sure, you could probably go to the odd event and find one player who's maybe being a little bit sketchy, doing sketchy things, but it wouldn't be at every event, and those players will generally get shunned in the long run. Most competitive players that I've played against, very friendly, very nice people. You're having a nice game until you obviously lose, but you're having a nice friendly game. And it is weird because one thing I would like to say is that the most balanced games necessarily aren't the most fun games, or vice versa, because people really enjoy 40k. It may not be particularly balanced. Chess is completely balanced, but for a large people, it's a very popular, well-liked game, but a lot of wargamers probably wouldn't play it. So the balance is, it's not a direct correlation in that sense. And I think, honestly, if you took away the randomness from our toy soldiers, a lot of us probably wouldn't play it. If there was no randomness in a Star Wars Legion game, and you just did 3 damage, and you were oh, I have a defense of 2, that's 1 wound through, you'd be oh, okay. I think it would very quickly become a mathematical calculation rather than, say, a fun gaming experience. So there is that, and I think ultimately that Star Wars Legion won't go the way of Guild Ball for 2 main reasons. And one is the fact that there is still quite a bit of randomness in Star Wars Legion. Now, you might, if you're a competitive player, you might shun the idea of randomness. Oh, I don't want the games to be random. I want the best player to win 100% of the time. Therefore, I don't want any randomness. But really, go play chess, go play Go. There's games out there for people who don't really want that randomness. If you want to experience wargaming, randomness is sort of inherent in the experience, and the best players will generally try and mitigate the randomness, or play in a way that means that they'll win most of the time, obviously. So the fact there's still enough randomness in Legion. You've got your command cards, which isn't random. Obviously, you're picking yours and your opponent's picking theirs, but you don't necessarily know what they're going to pick. But there's the bluffing element of the game. There's obviously the dice rolls, and we've got quite a few different dice rolls. Maybe it's a 1 in 8 that you're going to save this, or it's a 1 in 6 you're going to hit, or whatever it is. So there is quite there's enough variance there that basically you could go to a game, you could play against the best player, you could roll all hits and they could roll all blanks, and you would just win. Basically, I suspect that could happen. The chances of that are very unlikely, but there's enough randomness in the game that I think it'll still, like, it'll never quite hit the level of Guild Ball. Now, I never played Guild Ball, so bear with me on that. But the game is bigger in terms of how many, like, well, maybe how many models are on the table, but also in the physical board size. So you've got more randomness with terrain and that kind of stuff. Now, it all comes down to this, like, concept here of, like, randomness and competitive gaming is how often should the best player win, right? So in chess, like, a grandmaster would beat me literally 100 times out of 100. I would just get absolutely wrecked at chess. Right? And I suspect I could practice for years and years and years, and the grandmaster would still beat me every single time. Now, I could probably play the world champion of Star Wars Legion and probably lose 99 out of 100, but I might win one. And it's unlikely because I'm not that good. but the point being that I still think, like, that's hard to say. It's hard for me to quantify that. Obviously, I'm using me an example, which is Paul, but, you know, the best player versus the worst player, how often should they win? And then let's say you've got a player who's in the top 40% or the 40th percentage or percentile, whatever they want to call it, and then you've got a player who's in the 60th percentile. So, you know, should they win? Should the best player there win 6 out of 10? Or should they win 10 times out of 10 because they're the best player? It's quite a complicated thing to consider. What difference is enough difference that the player should almost always win versus at what difference should a player be affected by, like, win 7 out of 10 or that kind of stuff. And you know, there is no real right answer to that. The thing with randomness being involved in a game is that it'll generally, the worst player will generally still have a chance of beating the better player because of that randomness, and it keeps things more, like, fun and swingy and interesting. Now, for the super high and competitive players, like, let's say you've got the 2 best players in the world playing, maybe one of them is slightly better than the other. Should they win? Should that slightly better one win 100% of the time? It's honestly a really, like, complicated thing. I wouldn't, like, try and answer it here, but I do think that Legion still has enough variance in it to keep it primarily fun for a lot of people, for the vast majority of the audience. I think there's enough for the competitive players to identify themselves and make themselves the better players, and then I think there's enough randomness for the rest of us to still enjoy the game. Now, I don't know if I explained that very well, but it's difficult for me to understand. So for me to then try and explain to people, it's stupid because I don't know what I'm talking about. But but you get the idea, hopefully. And then I think, like, another reason it's, see, this is something that happened to Guild Ball as well. Like, you use your competitiveness as a distinct differentiator from, say, the other competitors. Now, Guild Ball obviously did that, and I'm aware of that. But I think combined with the randomness and the support Legion is getting, that I do think Legion has this enough of it to sort of stick around. It's not just that. They both focusing on competitive, but, like, Star Wars Legion is essentially, you know, trying to increase the quality of their models. We move to sprues, we've got paints and that kind of stuff. They're sort of like, FFG are sort of trying to expand it and not just saying, like, this is a competitive game and that's all it is. So, I mean, Games Workshop, the reason I'm saying it's a unique selling point against the behemoth of the Monopoly, it's not Monopoly, but the very strong position that Games Workshop have, you know, they've got great models, great lore, all that kind of history, you know, they've been going for 40 years or what have you. So Games Workshop, for all intensive purposes, have a lot of advantages, but they don't seem to really care that much for competitive play. In fact, they say, why even bother? Because most of their audience isn't interested in competitive play. So I think this is a good thing that Legion can do, is that it can differentiate itself and say, like, hey, if you are interested in competitive play, come here. Yeah, we're not going to be as big as 40k or whatever, but, you know, we'll use it as a little differentiator and try and attract those people. And then I think, like, Legion will use that to go into these hobby areas, you know, with the better miniatures and better quality sculpts and all that kind of stuff. And the lore's a little bit different because it's Star Wars, therefore they're a little bit limited in what they can and can't do. But yeah, I think GW not supporting competitive play is like its own separate thing as well. Like, imagine if Games Workshop actually supported competitive play a bit more commonly for 40k, and it ran events at, like, you know, your local game stores rather than just Warhammer World. Like, if they had official events and an official scene that ran at, like, Element Games, that's in the UK near me, but, you know, like your actual local shops, and they had, like, a scene a little bit like the ITC and Frontline Gaming are doing in the US, I do think that the distinct advantage that Legion would have would be a little bit diminished, because if the game is supported, people would just be like, well, it might not be the best game, but it's a bigger game and I'll play that. But the fact that GW aren't really supporting it means, you know, Legion can come across with its like organized play, which obviously in these recent times have been like postponed, but you know, it can come across and try and like actually scoop up the little like stragglers who are like, I want a competitive game, I'm not playing 40k because it's random as balls. Right. To be fair, there are, weirdly, I don't want to claim that the best players in 40k don't win. There's a couple of players in the UK who are like literally the best players who seem to win most of the events or do very well at all of the events. So even in games like 40k and Age of Sigmar, the better players do win most of the time. But even that's not saying that it's not that the better players don't win. It's more complex and considered than that, which I can't fully grasp the whole, you know, every little detail here and there. How often does this best player win? I bet there's some games where the best player in like 40k probably don't stand a chance, and in those games it's like, oh, that's bad. Maybe that doesn't happen in Legion. It's quite a complicated subject, and I may do a video talking about competitive play, but I'd have to probably research it more myself. On a personal note, like I've been struggling to come to terms with like a bit of a mentality change for myself, because when I started wargaming, I don't know, when like years and years ago, probably like when we were playing Warhammer Fantasy, me and my friends, they were all happy just playing people on the table and stuff like that, whereas I was like, no, I really want to go to events. I really want to go to a tournament and beat people and stuff like that. Now, I never actually did that because, you know, I was making my armies and stuff like that. I never actually got to an event. I don't know why I stopped playing. I just stopped playing. I think they got rid of Fancy. It was probably, or at least the rumours were that they were getting rid of Fancy, so I stopped. But yeah, I always wanted to be like not a competitive player, not like number one, number two, but I wanted to go to events and just try my best, right? And then obviously we've done that on the channel, but I'm sort of coming to terms with the fact that I can't really follow the meta or practice enough to be as good as I'd want to be, if that makes sense. You know, for Star Wars Legion particularly, I'm not going to buy like literally everything that I need for all the factions, because I don't think I could afford that, and which is the main one. And I don't think I have the time really, with the baby and stuff like that, and the terrain channel doing incredibly well, that I don't really have the time to be as competitive a player as like in Star Wars Legion as I wanted to be. And that's been quite like a difficult mental change in my head, to be like, oh well, I'm not going to buy everything, I'm not going to follow you know, the meta, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm just going to go to events, hopefully like whatever event I can get to when events start happening. I'm going to go to the event. Yeah, I'll take whatever list I've got, maybe the best of whatever I've got, but I'm not necessarily going to buy everything. You know, if I don't have 3 ARC troopers or whatever, then I'm not worried about it. If I don't have tauntauns, not going to stress about it. I'll go try and do my best, try and finish mid-table, and then just leave it. Like, I'm not going to practice for it. I'm not going to run the super meta list. Yeah, it's been quite it's a bit of a mental change for me. I'm not particularly thrilled about it. But that's where I am personally. I'm coming to terms with not being competitive now. Maybe in like a decade or whatever, maybe I'll have enough time and try and pump up my competitiveness. But I'm still going to go to events and try my best. But I'm just not going to stress about, you know, I really wanted to qualify for Worlds, for example, when that was a thing. I was like trying to qualify for Worlds. Don't really matter now. Not really that interested. But yeah, so. Will competitive gaming hurt Legion? I think no. I think it's actually going to benefit Legion. I think what actually hurt Guild Ball was the fact that there was probably not enough randomness in it, and not enough like it was like a solvable problem. It was a little bit like chess, in that the best players could study it and knew the best gameplay. Now in Legion, I think there's more variables, not just in dice rolls but in terrain and stuff like that, that'll actually keep it fresh, and it'll find this nice balance between competitive and sort of randomness. That's my thoughts. Have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. It was a bit rambly, this video. Goodbye.